No band has embodied the punk aesthetic more than Beat Happening. Not the maniacal fury of Minor Threat, not the politically driven assault of Dead Kennedys, not even the vitriolic rage of the Sex Pistols. Beat Happening, in their philosophy, their image, and most clearly of all, in their sound, represented everything that punk, at least in a more abstract form, ever stood for. Founded by K Records founder Calvin Johnson in 1982, the Olympia-based twee pop band are one of the defining examples of what it means to be indie, quote-unquote. The vocals on many of their songs are amateurish and unpolished. Their early singles and albums sound like they were recorded on a voice memo. They could barely even play any of their instruments. But despite this, Beat Happening have made some of the most gorgeous and emotionally striking music I have ever heard in my life. In the words of member Heather Lewis, yeah, Beat Happening are a godsend. Beat Happening would not exist without K Records. In the late 1970s, in the peaceful town of Olympia, Washington, a 15-year-old Calvin Johnson began DJing for the local college radio station, KAOS. KAOS was the primary radio station of Evergreen College and had been going strong since the early 70s, with music director John Foster championing independent music. Foster implemented the rule that 80% of the radio station's music had to be released by independent labels. In addition to KAOS, Foster founded the Lost Music Network, or LMN, which, in his words, was an educational, non-profit organization with members all over the world doing their part to educate others about musics that are not widely known. A fan of independent music since his early teens, Johnson began playing post-punk such as the Slits and the Raincoats on KAOS, before being replaced by Sub Pop founder and close friend Bruce Pavitt in 1980. Along with DJing for KAOS, Johnson began writing for the LMN, writing a column about the punk band The Avengers. Both KAOS and LMN emphasized the idea of regionalism, which, according to music historian Michael Azerrad in his book Our Band Could Be Your Life, was the idea that a localized sound would both serve the taste and needs of its community and defy the homogenizing effects of mass media, and egalitarianism, and that music didn't need to be made by professionals, as the big-time entertainment business would have the public believe. This concept of regionalism would drive Johnson's personal philosophy, as well as his creative undertakings. Inspired by the influence of the burgeoning independent movement, his belief that culture could be produced by anyone, and the inspiration to use cheap cassettes from his close friend Bruce Pavitt, Johnson founded K Records in 1982. Through K, Johnson began to form his idea of what a punk should even be. He realized that, in many ways, the world of punk had become a closed-off space, home to overwhelming masculinity and aggression. By creating K, Johnson was able to foster a more welcoming and less intimidating environment for bands and regular people to be a part of. And as it turned out, Beat Happening and K were a major force in widening the idea of a punk rocker from a mohawk guy in a motorcycle jacket to a nerdy girl in a cardigan. Beat Happening's frequent callbacks to QT60's teen pop in both their sound and their lyrics emphasized the fact that they didn't give a single fuck about what was considered punk or not. Additionally, music writer Brian Parker makes an astute observation about Beat Happening's relationship to punk in his 33 and a third book about the group's debut album, writing, "Beat Happening can't claim to be the first band to see or do things differently. However, they provided a whole different way to do things differently. Even bands like the Ramones or Minor Threat that broke rules did so by playing with the rules, stepping over the lines, pushing them outward, drawing them in new ways. Beat Happening simply pretended there were no lines at all. In completely annihilating even the concept of boundaries and norms, Beat Happening further emphasized the point that in their eyes, anyone, and that meant anyone, could do it." Since K Records was literally ran from Johnson's apartment, and his only line of communication was a single telephone, K Records didn't exactly capture the national consciousness instantly. K Records released a few cassettes in its early years, including a cassette titled Danger Is Their Business, which featured random people from Olympia singing a cappella. This increasingly exemplified Johnson's philosophy that anyone could create culture, and that localized culture could survive in an increasingly monocultural, capitalistic society. Johnson formed Beat Happening in early 1983 with friends Heather Lewis and Laura Carter, the latter being replaced by Brett Lunsford later on in the year. Lunsford remembers seeing Beat Happening for the first time, recalling that performance was so riveting. It was amazing how naked the band let themselves be, and yet normal at the same time. As much as you can say that Calvin on stage is normal. Nobody in the band could competently play their instruments. Most of their shows were performed without even a single rehearsal, which led to some pretty ramshackle performances. The band members were barely able to make it through a whole song without making several mistakes. Compared to Beat Happening, most big punk bands at the time might as well been as technically virtuous as Yes or Rush. Beat Happening's music, at least when the band weren't messing up, was characterized by sugary sweet subject matter, minimalist song structures, and most clearly of all, Johnson and Lewis's unpolished voices. Lewis's saccharine voice contrasted greatly with Johnson's booming baritone and added to the amateurishness of their aesthetic. Beat Happening's live shows were also a defining feature of their early existence. Johnson combined the Iggy Pop stage antics with what can only be described as abstract performance art. Michael Azerrad writes, "In concert, he contort himself affectedly, like a 4-year-old, reaching his hand back to his shoulder blades, or clutching at his too small t-shirt, grinding his hips, then pogo with fey abandon, now and then coyly flashing his chubby belly, much to the delight of his female fans." Through all of this, Beat Happening were able to subvert what a punk rock band should even be. Gone were the days of bald-headed shirtless guys screaming in your face about killing cops. Now there are these 3 nerdy-looking people in sweaters, singing about young love, while still having that rudimentary energy that attracted so many people to punk music. Beat Happening showed people that being punk wasn't about following a specific set of norms and expectations, but rather is about how you could be whatever the fuck you wanted to be. Beat Happening released their first album, Beat Happening, in early 1985. While the crudely drawn cover art of a cat on a rocket may allude to visions of childhood and young romance, every song on Beat Happening, hidden under its winsome imagery and sound, has an undercurrent of melancholy and reflection. Heather Lewis's tracks are especially surrounded in sadness. Opener Foggy Eyes is a tragic tale of the transition from childhood to adulthood, with Lewis's childlike voice adding wistful somberness to the song. Foggy eyes looking at their friends, wondering what's to become of them, thinking about the way it used to be. I Let Them Get to Me describes the experience of jealousy and envy of the narrator when they see their implied ex-boyfriend. 'Cause I let him get to me, but you don't let me get to him. I let him get to me, you don't let me get to him. I let him get to me, but you don't let me get to him. I let him get to me, you don't let me get to him. Even the seemingly idyllic Down at the Sea has a sense of longing gloom to it, sounding almost like a parody of what a fun summer day should be. The idealized imagery of beach balls and palm trees only serve to emphasize the shallowness of such a celebration. Mr. Fish says he's having a party down at the sea with really loud music and the food is free. Down at the sea. Contrary to Lewis's songs, Johnson's songs contain a unique theatrical and bombastic energy to them, with him taking on a persona in many songs. His thundering baritone barrels through tracks like In Love With You Thing and I Spy, the latter featuring a fantastical tale about a spy who travels around the world. I'm at home in the streets of Rome, or just hanging around old Shanghai. Danger is my logo, espionage and go-go, I'm just digging this American crime. Another Johnson track, Bad Seeds, which also happens to be my favorite off the album, is a call to action to create a separate culture, one away from the giant media magnates and corporation. Johnson bellows, "The new generation forms a teenage nation. This time, let's do it right." Beat Happening was released to little fanfare. It sold around 1,000 copies. Suffice to say, Beat Happening were not a very big deal outside of Olympia, and they weren't even that popular within the city. Despite the fact that barely anyone knew who they were, and the fact that many more traditional venues were actually opposed to such an iconoclastic group, Beat Happening continued touring. They were frequently subjected to booing and heckling while they played, with one bizarre anecdote featuring Henry Rollins, where the Black Flag frontman grabbed Johnson's genitals due to his dislike of the band. This is somehow true. I couldn't believe it either. Beat Happening's second album, Jamboree, widely regarded to be their best, sees a dramatic shift in the confidence of the band. The album feels far more whole, as well as feeling far more full of life. The production by Johnson's former friend Steve Fisk sounds fresher, but still maintains the unstable, ramshackle edge that made Beat Happening, well, Beat Happening. Johnson's baritone is as thunderous as ever. His persona is taking on a whole new life to them. The opener, Bewitched, details the age-old topic of having a crush on someone. The rudimentary punkish opening is met by the irony of Johnson howling about ice cream cones and a teenage infatuation. Further exemplifying the band's punk ethos, the guitar riff is pretty much just 3 notes for the entire song. The song almost sounds like a punk version of a 60s bubblegum track.
I see you hanging that crowd, staring me down like that ice cream cone, still I'm all alone.
Then there's Indian Summer, likely their best known song, and also the first Beat Happening song I ever heard. Similar to most of the album, the same guitar riff is repeated throughout the whole track. Johnson's baritone sounds infinitely more sentimental and longing. There's almost a lullaby-like quality to it. The song describes a time of teenage idol, but still maintains that sense of melancholy and longing so apparent in all of Beat Happening's songs.
We'll come back for Indian summer. We'll come back for Indian summer. We'll come back for Indian summer.
Johnson also sings a lot about food in this song, perhaps insinuating some Freudian innuendo.
On wild berries, French toast with molasses.
I mean, the cover is literally of a poorly drawn strawberry. Things get more theatrical and bombastic on Hangman, where Johnson embodies the persona of an emotionless executioner who treats executions as just another part of his day. Another truly spellbinding Johnson vocal performance sees him using the resonance of his baritone to give the track a more dangerous-sounding edge.
There's a little village near the center of Spain, where a jealous brother pulled a cold-blooded Cain.
Other incredible tracks include Crashing Through and Midnight A Go-Go. However, any discussion of this album is not complete without mentioning the absolute fucking mania of the closer, the This Many Boyfriends Club. Recorded live in a hall in Ellensburg, Washington, the song, if you even can call it that, is 3 minutes of the cacophonous caterwauling of Lunsford's guitar, paired with Johnson's maniacal, off-tuned vocal performance. The track lacks any sort of structure or rhythm, but it still remains enthralling and exhilarating throughout its entire runtime. I hated this song when I first heard it, but now I've grown to find it to be a confusing but exhilarating listen.
This many boyfriends walk her home. This many boyfriends ring the phone.
Jamboree as a whole is 24 minutes of unhinged but occasionally vulnerable twee pop. It's heavy but also sweet. Jamboree, similar to their debut, also didn't sell that well, but it did propel Beat Happening towards their first European tour. At the same time, Johnson started to expand his idea of an international pop underground, which saw K Records release material from independent bands from all over the world, such as England's The Pastels, Japan's Shonen Knife, and Germany's Bartleby's, as well as collaborating with several different labels, such as Sub Pop and England's By Jupiter. This created a sort of underground network between independent-minded musicians, who were able to share information and resources, and in a way, combated the ever-growing monoculture from all over the world. This spread of independent ideas would eventually lead to what many indie musicians regarded as one of the greatest events of the indie era.
We'll come back for Indian summer. We'll come back for Indian summer. We'll come back for Indian